They say that when you lose your memory, you lose yourself. But what happens when everyone thinks you've forgotten everything, but you remember every single detail? Every lie, every secret, every betrayal. 3 weeks ago, I woke up in room 314 at Riverside General Hospital with everyone believing I had complete amnesia from a car accident. My husband Jake was by my bedside, holding my hand, tears in his eyes, whispering how much he loved me. The doctor said I might never remember our life together. But here's the thing nobody knew: I remembered everything, including the love. Letters he'd been writing to his ex-girlfriend Ashley. The same letters I'd found hidden in his desk drawer the night before my accident. Letters that made me realize our entire marriage was a lie. So I made a choice that would change everything. I decided to let him think I'd forgotten while I planned the perfect revenge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Maya Chen, and 3 weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect life. I was 28, working as a marketing coordinator at Pacific Marketing Group in Portland, Oregon, married to Jake Morrison, who everyone said was the perfect husband. Jake was 30, successful in real estate, charming, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the world. We lived in a beautiful townhouse on Elm Street in the upscale Maple Heights neighborhood, and I genuinely believed we were building something beautiful together. But perfect lives have a way of crumbling when you least expect it. It was a Thursday evening in late September when my world first started to crack. I'd come home early from work, excited to surprise Jake with his favorite dinner from Blue Harbor Bistro. I'd been planning to tell him about the promotion I just received, and I was practically floating on air as I climbed the stairs to his home office to share the good news. That's when I heard him on the phone, his voice soft and tender in a way that made my stomach clench. I paused outside the door, something primal inside me recognizing danger even before my mind caught up. "I know, baby," he was saying, and the word baby hit me like a physical blow. "I miss you too." Maya has no idea about any of this. She's so naive, so trusting. Sometimes I feel guilty, but then I think about us, about what we could have together. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it through the door. Maya, he was talking about me like I was some obstacle to overcome, some inconvenience in his real life. "Ashley, you know you're the one I really want," Jake continued, and hearing that name, Ashley Reed, his ex-girlfriend from college, made my knees nearly give out. Maya is safe, predictable. But you're fire, you're passion, you're everything I need. I managed to slip back downstairs before he finished his call, my hands shaking as I set the takeout containers on the kitchen counter. When Jake came down 20 minutes later, he kissed my cheek and complimented the food, asking about my day with such convincing interest that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole conversation. But that night, after Jake fell asleep, I did something I'd never done in our 3 years of marriage. I went through his things. What I found in the locked drawer of his desk made me physically sick. There were dozens of printed emails between Jake and Ashley, love letters that spanned the last 6 months. Letters where he called her his real love, where he detailed intimate moments they'd shared, where he made plans for their future together. Plans that didn't include me. One letter in particular was burned into my memory. "My dearest Ashley, every day with Maya feels like I'm living someone else's life. She's a good person, and that's the problem. She deserves someone who can love her the way she loves me. But I can't be that person because my heart belongs to you. I've belonged to you since we were 20, and I'll belong to you when we're 80. This marriage was a mistake, but I didn't realize it until you came back into my life. Soon, my love. Soon we'll be together the way we were always meant to be." I sat in that dark office until dawn, reading letter after letter, each one destroying another piece of the life I thought I knew. Jake hadn't just been cheating on me. He'd been living an entirely different emotional reality. To him, I was the other woman in his own marriage. The next morning, Jake acted completely normal. He made coffee, kissed me goodbye, and told me he loved me, just like every other morning for the past 3 years. But now I could see the performance in it, the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine, the mechanical quality of his affection. I called in sick to work and spent the day in a daze, trying to figure out what to do with this devastating knowledge. I thought about confronting him, about demanding explanations, about throwing the letters in his face and watching him scramble for excuses, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way he'd called me naive and trusting on that phone call. Maybe I wanted to prove him wrong. That evening, I decided to follow him. Jake had said he was going to show a property to a potential client, but instead of heading to any of his listings, he drove straight to Zen Flow Studio downtown. Through the large windows, I could see Ashley Reed leading a yoga class, her long, blonde hair flowing as she moved through poses. She was beautiful in that effortless way that some women are, the kind of beauty that doesn't need makeup or fancy clothes to shine. After her class ended, Jake went inside. I watched from my car as they embraced, as he spun her around like they were in some romantic movie. The way he looked at her, it was everything I'd thought he felt for me, but magnified. This wasn't just an affair. This was a man in love with someone who wasn't his wife. They went to her apartment at the Bridgewood complex, and I sat in that parking lot for 3 hours, feeling like my entire identity was dissolving. I wasn't Maya Morrison, beloved wife. I was Maya Chen, the woman standing in the way of true love. When I finally drove home that night, my mind was spinning with hurt and anger and a strange, cold clarity. I was going to confront Jake the next day. I was going to lay out all the evidence and demand the truth. I was going to fight for my marriage or end it, but I wasn't going to live in this lie anymore. But life has a way of changing your plans in the most unexpected ways. I was driving to work the next morning, rehearsing what I was going to say to Jake, when a delivery truck ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my Honda Civic. The last thing I remembered was the sound of breaking glass and the strange thought that Jake would finally get what he wanted. When I woke up in the hospital 2 days later, Jake was there. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usually perfect hair was messy, and he was holding my hand like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Maya," he whispered when he saw my eyes open. "Thank God. I thought I was going to lose you." The irony was almost laughable.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He was afraid of losing something he'd already thrown away. Dr. Emma Walsh, a kind woman in her 50s with gentle hands and tired eyes, explained that I'd suffered a severe concussion and some internal injuries, but that I was going to be fine. Then she said the words that would change everything. "You may experience some memory issues," she told Jake, "not me. It's not uncommon with this type of head trauma. Some patients have gaps in their recent memory, sometimes going back weeks or even months." I saw something flicker in Jake's eyes. Not concern, not fear relief. That's when I made the decision that would define the next 3 weeks of my life. I looked at Jake with what I hoped was confusion and said the words that would give me the power I needed. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice weak from the breathing tube they'd removed. "Do I know you?" The relief that flooded Jake's face was unmistakable. Here was his chance to rewrite history, to erase the Ashley situation and start fresh with a wife who didn't know about his betrayal. "I'm Jake," he said softly, squeezing my hand. "I'm your husband." I let my face register what I hoped looked like struggling recognition. "Husband?" I repeated, as if the word was foreign. Over the next several days, Jake transformed into the most attentive, loving partner anyone could imagine. He brought me flowers, read to me, showed me photo albums of our life together. He told me story after story about how we met, how we fell in love, how happy we'd been. And every word was delivered with such conviction that I almost believed he believed it himself. We met in college, he told me, brushing a strand of hair from my face with a tenderness that felt both familiar and completely foreign. You were in the library, studying for a marketing exam, and I was supposed to be researching real estate law, but I couldn't concentrate because you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. That part was true. We had met in the library. But what Jake didn't mention was that he'd been dating Ashley Reed at the time, and that he'd only asked me out after she'd broken up with him to study abroad in Italy. You said yes to coffee. Jake continued, and we talked for 6 hours. I knew that night that you were going to be my wife. Another half-truth. We had talked for 6 hours, but most of that conversation had been Jake telling me about Ashley, about how heartbroken he was, about how he didn't know if he'd ever love anyone again. I'd been the rebound that accidentally became permanent. My brother David came to visit on the 3rd day, his face creased with worry. David was 2 years older than me, a software engineer with an analytical mind and a protective streak a mile wide. He'd never particularly liked Jake, though he'd been too polite to say so directly. "How are you feeling, Maya?" David asked, studying my face carefully. "Confused," I answered honestly. "Everything feels foggy." David's eyes narrowed slightly, and I caught him watching Jake with suspicion. My brother had always been good at reading people, and something about Jake's overly solicitous behavior was setting off his alarm bells. "The doctors say her recent memory might be affected," Jake explained to David, his arm protectively around my shoulders. "She might not remember the last few months clearly." "Interesting," David said slowly. "What's the last thing you remember?" "Clearly, Maya." I pretended to concentrate, putting on a show of struggling with my memory. "I remember our anniversary dinner," I said finally, "at that seafood place you like." I was deliberately vague, watching Jake's face. "Blue Harbor Bistro," Jake supplied quickly. "That was 6 months ago." 6 months. Right around the time his correspondence with Ashley had started ramping up. How convenient. 6 months, David repeated, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "That's a significant gap." Jake's hand tightened on my shoulder. "The doctors say it could come back gradually. We just have to be patient." But I could see in Jake's eyes that he was hoping it never came back at all. That night after David left and Jake went home to get some rest, I lay in my hospital bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about the performance I'd just witnessed. Jake had spent the entire day playing the role of devoted husband, but I'd caught him checking his phone constantly, stepping into the hallway to take calls, making excuses about work that needed his attention. I wondered if he was talking to Ashley, if he was telling her about my convenient memory loss, if they were planning their future together while I lay here pretending to be brain damaged. The thought filled me with a cold anger that felt more powerful than the hurt. Jake thought he'd gotten away with everything. He thought my amnesia was his get-out-of-jail-free card, his chance to erase his betrayal and rewrite our history. But I remembered everything. Every letter, every lie, every moment of his performance. And I was going to use that knowledge to destroy him in a way he'd never see coming. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I wasn't Maya Chen, the naive wife who'd been betrayed. I was Maya Chen, the woman with a plan, and Jake Morrison had no idea what was coming for him. The morning after my decision to pretend I didn't remember Jake, I woke up to find him sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair, still wearing yesterday's clothes. His eyes were bloodshot, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there was a coffee cup trembling in his hands. When he saw me stirring, relief flooded his face so completely that for a moment, I almost felt guilty about what I was planning. "Maya, thank God you're awake," he said, immediately moving to my bedside. "How are you feeling? Any pain? Do you remember me today?" I let confusion cloud my features, blinking slowly as if trying to focus. "You're Jake?" I said hesitantly, as if the name was struggling to surface from some deep place in my mind. The hope that lit up his face was almost painful to witness. Yes, I'm Jake. I'm your husband. Do you remember anything else?" I shook my head, slowly, wincing as if the movement caused discomfort. "It's all so foggy. The doctor said you've been here all night." "I couldn't leave you," Jake said, and his voice carried what sounded like genuine emotion. "Maya, I was so scared I was going to lose you when I got the call about your accident." He trailed off, his hand finding mine and squeezing gently. What Jake didn't say was how that call had reached him. He'd been at Ashley's apartment when the hospital called, and I wondered what excuse he'd given her for rushing out in the middle of their evening together. Dr. Walsh arrived for her morning rounds, and I watched Jake transform into the concerned husband role with practiced ease. He asked intelligent questions about my condition, took notes about my medication schedule, and generally presented himself as a man completely devoted to his wife's recovery. "The memory issues may persist for some time," Dr. Walsh explained. "To both of us. Every brain injury is different, and recovery isn't always linear. Some patients regain everything within days, others have permanent gaps, and some recover memories gradually over months or even years. What can I do to help?" Jake asked, and the earnestness in his voice was so convincing that even I might have believed it if I hadn't known better. "Be patient," Dr. Walsh replied. "Don't push too hard to make her remember things. Let her recovery happen naturally. Sometimes trying to force memories can actually be counterproductive." I saw something flicker in Jake's eyes at this advice. Don't push too hard to make her remember. It was like the doctor had just given him permission to avoid any conversations about our recent past. After Dr. Walsh left, Jake pulled his chair closer to my bed and took my hand again. "Maya, I want you to know that whatever you remember or don't remember, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're okay, that you're here with me. Tell me about us," I said softly. "I feel like there should be something familiar, but it's all just empty." Jake's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine joy at the opportunity to share our story. But as he began talking, I realized he was editing our history in real time, crafting a narrative that painted our relationship in the most romantic possible light. "We met at the University of Oregon," he began, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "You were studying marketing, and I was in the business program. I saw you in the library one afternoon, and I swear, Maya, it was like everything else in the room just disappeared." This part was true, though Jake failed to mention that he'd been dating Ashley at the time and had initially approached me as a rebound after one of their many dramatic breakups. "I was too nervous to talk to you for weeks," Jake continued, his voice taking on a dreamy quality. "But finally, I worked up the courage to ask if you wanted to study together. You said yes, and we ended up talking until the library closed." Also true, though what Jake didn't mention was that most of that conversation had been him lamenting about Ashley and how he wasn't sure if she was the one anymore. "When did you know you loved me?" I asked, genuinely curious about how he would navigate this particular fabrication. Jake's eyes went soft, and for a moment I almost believed the emotion I saw there. "Our third date," he said without hesitation. "We went for a walk along the river, and you started talking about your dreams for the future. You had this incredible passion for life, this way of seeing possibilities everywhere. I knew right then that I wanted to be part of whatever future you were building." The memory was real, but Jake had altered the context completely. That conversation had happened, but it had taken place 6 months into our relationship, after Ashley had left for her yoga training in India, and Jake had finally stopped treating me like a temporary distraction. Over the next few hours, a steady stream of visitors arrived, each one seeming to have been coached on how to handle the situation. Jake's sister Rachel came first, bringing flowers and an abundance of nervous energy. Maya, sweetie, how are you feeling? Rachel asked, but her eyes kept darting to Jake as if seeking guidance on what to say. I'm okay, I replied carefully. Though I have to admit, I don't really remember much about you. Jake says you're his sister? Yes, We've always been close, Rachel said, though her voice carried an odd note of uncertainty. You and we're friends, good friends. This was a stretch of the truth. Rachel and I had always maintained a polite relationship, but we'd never been particularly close. She was friendly enough, but there had always been a subtle competitiveness between us, especially after Jake and I got married and she was still single. Tell me something about myself, I said to Rachel, something that might help me remember who I am. Rachel glanced at Jake again before answering. You're very career-focused. Sometimes maybe too much so.
You work really hard, sometimes at the expense of other things. There was something pointed about the way she said this, as if she was conveying a criticism rather than sharing a fond memory. I caught Jake nodding approvingly at his sisters. Characterization. But you love Jake so much, Rachel continued, apparently finding her footing. Anyone can see how devoted you are to him. You two are like soulmates. The word soulmates came out stilted, as if Rachel had been instructed to use it, but didn't quite believe it herself. Tyler Brooks arrived shortly after Rachel left, bringing coffee and an energy that felt more genuine than anything I'd experienced so far. Tyler had always been Jake's closest friend, and unlike Rachel, he seemed less coached and more naturally concerned about my condition. Maya, Jesus, you scared us all, Tyler said, giving me a careful hug. How's the head feeling? Confused. I admitted. Everything feels like it's behind a thick fog. Tyler nodded sympathetically. Yeah, I bet. But hey, you've got the best husband in the world taking care of you. Jake's barely left this hospital since your accident. He seems wonderful, I said, watching both men's faces. I just wish I could remember our life together better. You will, Tyler assured me. And if you don't, you guys can just make new memories. Maybe even better ones. There was something about Tyler's phrasing that made me pay closer attention. Maybe even better ones suggested that our previous memories might not have been entirely positive. Were we happy? I asked directly. Before the accident, Tyler and Jake exchanged a quick glance that they probably thought I didn't. Notice, of course, you were happy, Tyler said. But there was a slight delay before his response. Every marriage has its ups and downs, but you too. You always work through things. What kind of ups and downs? I pressed gently. Nothing serious, Jake interjected quickly. It's just normal couple stuff. Disagreements about whose turn it is to do dishes, that kind of thing. But Tyler's expression suggested the disagreements had been about more substantial issues than household chores. As the day progressed, I began to notice patterns in how our visitors interacted with me and with Jake. There was a careful quality to their responses, as if they'd all been briefed on what topics to avoid and which version. Of our relationship to present, Jake's mother, Patricia, arrived in the late afternoon with a casserole and an air of barely contained anxiety. Patricia had never particularly warmed to me, though she'd always been polite. She was one of those women who believed no one would ever be good enough for her precious son. Maya, dear, how are you feeling? Patricia asked, though her attention was primarily focused on Jake. Are the doctors taking good care of you? They seem to be, I replied. Though I'm struggling with my memory, I don't really remember much about our family relationships. Patricia's face went through an interesting series of expressions. Well, that's probably temporary. These things usually resolve themselves. Tell me about our relationship, I said to Patricia. Were we close? The question clearly made her uncomfortable. We got along fine. You're a very independent young woman, very focused on your career. There it was again, that emphasis on my career, as if it were somehow problematic. I was beginning to see a pattern in how Jake's family and friends were characterizing me. According to their version of events, I was a career-obsessed woman who sometimes neglected my relationship in favor of professional advancement. Patricia, I said carefully, do you think I was a good wife to Jake? The older woman's face flushed slightly, of course, dear. You and Jake both worked very hard at your marriage. The phrasing was telling. Not, you had a wonderful marriage, but you worked hard at your marriage, which suggested there had been significant problems that required effort to overcome. After Patricia left, Jake seemed more relaxed, as if he'd passed some kind of test. He settled back into his chair beside my bed and took my hand again. My family can be a bit overwhelming, he said apologetically. Don't worry if you don't remember everything about our relationships with them right away. They seem to think. I was very focused on my career, I observed. Jake's grip on my hand tightened slightly. You are ambitious, which is one of the things I love about you. But sometimes I worried that you prioritized work over our relationship. This was rich, coming from a man who had been conducting an emotional affair while I was working late to advance my career so we could afford the lifestyle he wanted. Did that cause problems between us? I asked. Not problems exactly, Jake said carefully. Just, we had to work to make sure we were both feeling appreciated and valued in the relationship. Jake was rewriting our history to make my career ambitions the source of any marital discord, conveniently overlooking his own emotional unavailability. And his ongoing relationship with Ashley, Dr. Walsh returned for an evening check-in, and I used the opportunity to ask more specific questions about my condition. Doctor, is it normal for memory loss to be so selective? I can remember general things, but personal relationships and recent events are completely blank. Dr. Walsh nodded. Often the memories that are most emotionally charged or most recent are the ones most affected by traumatic brain injury. Your brain is essentially protecting itself by blocking access to information that might be overwhelming during recovery. I saw Jake's face brighten at this explanation. The idea that my brain was protecting me from overwhelming information gave him a perfect excuse to avoid discussing anything that might trigger inconvenient memories. So pushing to remember things could actually be harmful? Jake asked. It could be, Dr. Walsh confirmed. The best approach is to let memories return naturally, if they return at all. Sometimes the brain decides that certain memories aren't worth recovering. Jake squeezed my hand meaningfully, as if this medical advice was some kind of sign that we were meant to move forward without looking back. That evening, after all the visitors had left and the hospital had settled into its nighttime quiet, Jake pulled his chair as close to my bed as possible and spoke in a low, intimate voice. Maya, I want you to know something important, he began. Before your accident, we were going through a rough patch. Nothing serious. Just, we'd gotten into some bad patterns. We were both working too much, not communicating well, taking each other for granted. This was the first time Jake had acknowledged any problems in our marriage, and I found myself genuinely curious about how he would frame the situation. I was planning to suggest we see a marriage counselor, Jake continued. I thought we needed help getting back to the place we were when we first fell in love. The lie was so smooth and convincing that I almost admired his skill. Jake had never mentioned marriage counseling before my accident. If anything, he'd seemed increasingly distant and disengaged from our relationship. But maybe this accident is a blessing in disguise, Jake said, echoing Ashley's earlier words. Maybe it's giving us a chance to start fresh, without all the baggage we'd accumulated. What kind of baggage? I asked. Jake hesitated, clearly calculating how much truth he could reveal without exposing his affair. Just resentments, small hurts that had built up over time. Felt like I wasn't present enough in our relationship, and I felt like you were more invested in your career than in us. He was making our marital problems sound mutual and equally weighted, when in reality he had been the one checking out of our marriage to pursue his relationship with Ashley. I'm sorry I made you feel neglected, I said softly, playing the repentant wife. No, baby, don't apologize, Jake said quickly. We both made mistakes, but that's all in the past now. What matters is that we have a second chance to do this right. A second chance. That's how Jake was framing my brain injury, as an opportunity for him to erase his betrayal and start over with a clean slate. Will you help me remember how to be a good wife? I asked, and the relief that flooded Jake's face was immediate. You were always a good wife, Maya. You just forgot sometimes that marriage is about partnership, about putting each other first. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Jake was lecturing me about putting each other first while he'd been writing love letters to another woman and planning his exit strategy from our marriage. As Jake settled in for another night in the uncomfortable hospital chair, I lay in the dark thinking about the elaborate performance I'd witnessed throughout the day. Every visitor had been coached to present a specific version of our relationship and my personality. I was being painted as an ambitious career woman who had neglected her marriage, while Jake was being portrayed as the patient, loving husband who had been trying to save our relationship. The gaslighting was systematic and sophisticated. Jake wasn't just lying about his affair with Ashley. He was reconstructing our entire relationship history to justify any future actions he might take. If he eventually decided to leave me, everyone would understand why. After all, I was the wife who had put career before marriage, who had been difficult to live with, who had created problems where none existed. But Jake had made one crucial error in his strategy. He assumed that a woman with brain damage would be easily manipulated, that I would gratefully accept whatever version of reality he chose to present. He had no idea that I remembered every detail of his betrayal, every lie he'd told, every moment of fake affection he'd performed. The Maya Chen lying in that hospital bed wasn't the naive wife who had discovered his letters and planned to confront him. This was a woman who had been forged in the fire of betrayal and was now playing a game that Jake didn't even realize had begun. And I was going to win. The next morning brought a new wave of carefully orchestrated visits, each designed to reinforce Jake's narrative about our marriage and my character. His business partner, Marcus Webb, arrived with flowers and an awkward energy that suggested he'd been reluctantly drafted into Jake's support system. "Maya, good to see you awake and alert," Marcus said, though his attention was primarily focused on Jake. "How's she doing?" he asked Jake, as if I weren't capable of answering for myself. "Better every day," Jake replied. "Her memory is still patchy, but the doctors are optimistic." Marcus nodded uncomfortably. That's good news. "Whole office has been worried about you both." I noticed that Marcus seemed nervous around me, avoiding direct eye contact and keeping his conversation generic. When I asked him about my relationship with the people at Jake's real estate office, his responses were vague and non-committal. "You always kept to yourself when you came by the office," Marcus said carefully. Very professional. This was code for something, though. I wasn't sure what. In reality, I'd always gotten along well with Jake's colleagues, but Marcus was painting me as standoffish and distant. "Did I come by the office often?" I asked. Marcus glanced at Jake before answering. "Not too often." "Oh." "You were usually pretty busy with your own work?" Again, the emphasis on my career, as if it were somehow excessive or problematic. I was beginning to understand that Jake had been laying groundwork for this narrative long before my accident, probably complaining too. Friends and family about my supposed work obsession to justify his own emotional distance? After Marcus left, Jake's demeanor shifted noticeably. He became more attentive, more physically affectionate, as if he were trying to counteract whatever impression Marcus might have given me. "Maya, I hope Marcus didn't give you the wrong idea about anything," Jake said, settling back into his bedside chair. "He's a good business partner, but he doesn't really understand our personal relationship." "What kind of wrong idea?" I asked innocently. "Just he sometimes thinks you're not interested in my work, but that's not true. You've always been supportive of my career, just like I support yours." This was another revision of history. I had been supportive of Jake's career, often to my own detriment, while he had shown minimal interest in my professional goals and achievements. "Tell me about my job," I said. "I know I work in marketing, but I can't remember what I actually do." Jake's face went through a series of micro-expressions before settling on what appeared to be pride mixed with resignation. "You're very talented," he said finally. "You work for Pacific Marketing Group, and you've been climbing the ladder. Pretty quickly, maybe too quickly." "What do you mean, too quickly?" "Just that success can be consuming. Sometimes I worried that you were so focused on advancement, you weren't taking time to enjoy what we'd built together." There it was again, the subtle undermining disguised as concern. Jake was positioning my professional success as a threat to our marriage, when in reality, my career had been one of the few things keeping me grounded during the months when I'd sensed his emotional withdrawal. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor that clearly caught Jake off guard. Sofia Martinez, my best friend from college, burst into the room with her characteristic energy, immediately flooding the space with genuine warmth and concern. "Maya, oh my God, I came as soon as I heard," Sofia said, rushing to embrace me carefully. "How are you feeling? Are you in pain?" For the first time since my accident, I felt myself relaxing in the presence of someone who actually cared about me, rather than managing my perception of reality. But I also knew I had to be careful not to reveal too much, especially with Jake watching every interaction. "I'm okay," I said, returning Sofia's hug. "But I have to admit, I don't remember much about anything recent." Sofia's face fell. "Nothing? What about our phone call last week?" I felt Jake tense beside me. "Phone call," Maya called me, Sofia said, looking between Jake and me with growing confusion. She seemed upset. "About something, but she wouldn't tell me what was wrong. She just said she needed to think about some things." Jake's hand found mine and squeezed it tightly. "The doctor said her memory of recent events might be completely gone," he said to Sofia. "Anything from the past few months could be missing. Permanently." Sofia's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion. "Permanently. But I thought memory loss from concussion, usually every case is different," Jake interrupted smoothly. "The important thing is that Maya is alive and recovering. Everything else can be rebuilt." I watched this exchange with fascination. Sofia clearly knew something that didn't align with Jake's narrative, but she was being shut down before she could share it. When she tried to speak privately with me, Jake found reasons to stay in the room or interrupt our conversation. "Maya, do you remember our last girls' weekend?" Sofia asked at one point. "We talked about so many important things." "I'm sorry," I said, though internally I was desperate to know what we'd discussed. "It's all blank." Sofia looked frustrated and worried. Before she left, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Call me when you're feeling better. I have some things I think you should know." After Sofia left, Jake was quiet for a long time, staring out the hospital window with a troubled expression. "She seems like a good friend," I said carefully. "Sofia means well," Jake replied, "but she's always been a bit dramatic. Sometimes she sees problems where none exist." Another dismissal, another attempt to undermine someone who might threaten his carefully constructed narrative. I was beginning to see that Jake's strategy involved not just rewriting our history, but discrediting anyone who might contradict his version of events. That evening, Jake announced that he'd spoken with my doctor about discharge plans. "Dr. Walsh thinks you might be ready to go home in a few days," he said. "I've been preparing everything to make your transition as smooth as possible." "What kind of preparations?" I asked. "Just making sure the house is set up for your recovery. I've been organizing photo albums, gathering things that might help trigger positive memories. I want your homecoming to be perfect." The idea of Jake organizing our shared history filled me with dread. He was willing to gaslight me about our relationship while I was in the hospital. Now, what kind of revisionist museum would I find waiting at home? "Jake," I said carefully, "I keep feeling like there's something important I should remember. Something about us. About our relationship. Is there anything you think I should know?" Abid's face went through a complex series of emotions before settling on what appeared to be loving concern. "Maya, the only thing you need to know is that I love you more than anything in this world. Whatever problems we might have had before your accident, they don't matter now. We have a chance to start fresh, to be the couple we always had the potential to be. Start fresh. Erase the past. Move forward without looking back." These phrases had become Jake's mantra, and I was beginning to understand why. He wasn't just trying to hide his affair with Ashley. He was trying to rewrite our entire relationship, to cast himself as the long-suffering husband of a difficult, career-obsessed wife. If I really had amnesia, I might have bought into this narrative. I might have felt grateful for a husband who was willing to overlook my supposed flaws and give our marriage another chance. I might have spent the rest of our relationship trying to atone for problems I'd never actually created, but I remembered everything. Every lie Jake had told, every moment of fake affection, every carefully orchestrated visitor who had been coached to support his version of reality. And I was documenting all of it, storing away every detail for the moment when I would finally reveal the truth about who Jake Morrison really was. As I lay in the dark that night, listening to Jake's breathing from the chair beside my bed, I thought about the elaborate performance I'd been witnessing. Jake wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was systematically destroying her sense of reality to cover his tracks. He was using her brain injury as an opportunity to gaslight her into believing she'd been the problem in their marriage all along. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, but it was also going to be his downfall, because while Jake thought he was manipulating a brain-damaged woman, he was actually revealing the full extent of his capacity for deception to someone who was recording every word, every gesture, every moment of his elaborate lie. And soon, very soon, Maya Chen was going to show Jake Morrison exactly what happened when you underestimated a woman who remembered everything. The day of my discharge from Riverside General arrived with Jake's characteristic orchestration. Arranged for a wheelchair, even though I could walk perfectly fine, brought me a bouquet of white orchids that he claimed were my favorites, and spent 20 minutes photographing our exit from the hospital as if documenting some momentous occasion. "This is the beginning of our new chapter," Jake said as he helped me into his BMW, his voice filled with a kind of emotion that sounded practiced rather than genuine. "Ow. Our fresh start, Maya." The drive home to our townhouse on Elm Street felt surreal. Jake kept pointing out landmarks and locations where he claimed we'd shared meaningful moments, most of which I was certain he was inventing on the spot. The coffee shop where we'd supposedly had our first fight in makeup, the park where he'd proposed for the second time after I'd temporarily lost my engagement ring, the intersection where we'd gotten caught in the rain and kissed under a broken umbrella. "Do any of these places feel familiar?" Jake asked hopefully, as we stopped at a red light. "They feel warm somehow," I lied, watching his face light up with satisfaction. "Like there are good memories attached to them, even if I can't access them directly." Jake squeezed my hand triumphantly. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Sometimes emotional memory survives even when factual memory doesn't. When we pulled into our driveway, I noticed immediately that something was different about our house. The flower boxes under the front windows had been replanted with varieties I'd never chosen, and there was a new welcome mat that read the Morrisons in elegant script. Even our home's exterior had been altered to support Jake's narrative about our supposedly perfect marriage. Inside, the changes were even more dramatic. Jake had clearly spent days preparing for my return, and the result was a museum dedicated to a relationship that had never existed. Every surface was covered with photographs, but they weren't the candid shots that had previously decorated our home. These were carefully curated images that told the story of an ideally happy couple. The coffee table held 3 new photo albums, their leather covers embossed with our names and wedding date. The mantelpiece displayed framed pictures of us that I didn't remember taking, all showing us looking blissfully content. Even the refrigerator had been transformed into a shrine of romantic notes and cute couple photos. "Welcome home, baby," Jake said, watching my face carefully for any sign of recognition or suspicion. "I know it might feel overwhelming at first, but I wanted you to see how much love we've built together." I moved through our living room slowly, examining the evidence of Jake's elaborate preparation. He'd even changed some of the furniture, placing our practical black leather couch with a cream-colored love seat that looked like something from a romantic comedy set. The throw pillows were in soft pastels instead of the bold colors I'd always preferred. "This is beautiful," I said, settling onto the unfamiliar love seat. "Did we decorate this room together?" "Every piece was chosen with love," Jake replied, which wasn't technically a lie since he'd clearly chosen every piece with the specific love of manipulating me in mind. Over the next few hours, Jake gave me a tour of our home that felt like a guided walk through someone else's life. In our bedroom, he'd replaced our practical cotton sheets with silk ones in romantic shades of pink and gold. The books on my nightstand had been switched from the mystery novels I actually enjoyed, 2 romance paperbacks with Fabio-style covers. "You always said these books helped you relax," Jake explained when I questioned the sudden appearance of a novel called Passion's Promise. On my bedside table, in his home office, the locked drawer where I'd discovered his correspondence with Ashley was now filled with what appeared to be love letters from me to him. The handwriting looked suspiciously like mine, but the content was so saccharine and adoring that I nearly laughed out loud. "You wrote me these beautiful letters throughout our marriage," Jake said, showing me one that supposedly expressed my gratitude for his patience during a difficult time at work. "You always had such a romantic way with words." The level of preparation was staggering. Jake had essentially created a fictional version of our relationship and then manufactured physical evidence to support it. If I really had amnesia, I might have been touched by this apparent demonstration of our love. Instead, I was horrified by the calculated nature of his deception. "Jake, these letters are beautiful," I said, handling one of the forgeries carefully. "I had no idea I was so expressive about my feelings." "You've always been incredibly loving," Jake replied. "Sometimes I worried that I didn't appreciate it enough." This was rich, considering that Jake had spent the past 6 months writing actual love letters to another woman while dismissing my real expressions of affection as clingy or needy. That evening, Jake prepared an elaborate dinner using recipes he claimed were from our special occasions. The meal was delicious, but I noticed he kept checking his phone throughout the preparation and kept making trips to the kitchen that seemed unnecessarily long. "This pasta is incredible," I said as we sat down to eat. "When did you become such an amazing cook?" "I learned because I wanted to surprise you," Jake replied, though something in his tone suggested he was distracted. "Food is one of the ways I show love." Halfway through dinner, Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. I saw his face change as he read it, a flash of something that looked like panic before he composed himself. "Work emergency," he said, standing up from the table. "I need to make a quick call." "Keep eating, baby. I'll be right back." But Jake didn't go to his office to make the call. Instead, he stepped outside onto our back patio, and through the kitchen window I could see him pacing. As he spoke in hushed, urgent tones, the conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes, and when he returned, his carefully maintained facade of domestic bliss seemed strained. "Everything okay?" I asked innocently. "Just client drama," Jake replied, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." I had a strong suspicion that Jake's client drama was actually Ashley wondering where he'd disappeared to and when she could expect him to resume their relationship. The thought of him juggling his fake marriage to me and his real relationship with her while I sat there playing brain damaged was almost too absurd to process. After dinner, Jake suggested we look through our wedding album together, claiming it might help trigger some positive memories. The album itself was genuine, but Jake's narration of the photos was yet another exercise in creative fiction. "How happy you were walking down the aisle," Jake said, pointing to a photo where I was indeed beaming with joy. "You told me later that you'd never felt more certain about anything in your life." I had said something like that, though at the time I'd been referring to my certainty that Jake loved me as much as I loved him. The irony was devastating now that I knew the truth about his feelings. "And here's our first dance," Jake continued, showing me a photo of us swaying together while our guests watched. "You whispered that you wanted the song to go on forever because you'd never been happier." Another real memory that Jake was recontextualizing to support his narrative. I had whispered something during our first dance, but it had been a joke. About my shoes pinching my feet and hoping the song would end soon so I could sit down. As we flipped through page after page of wedding photos, I began to notice something disturbing. In almost every picture, I looked genuinely happy and in love, while Jake looked like he was performing happiness. His smiles were polite and appropriate, but there was a distance in his eyes that I'd been too in love to notice at the time. "We look perfect together," I said, studying a photo of us cutting the cake. "We were perfect together," Jake replied. "Still are." But looking at these photos with the knowledge of his true feelings was like watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion. I could see my own naive joy in every frame, and I could see Jake's emotional absence disguised as wedding day nerves. That night, as we prepared for bed in our newly redecorated bedroom, Jake's performance of husbandly devotion reached new heights. He insisted on helping me with everything, from choosing pajamas to brushing my teeth, treating me like an invalid rather than someone with selective memory loss. "I want to take care of you," Jake said, when I protested that I could manage my own bedtime routine. "Let me show you how much I love you." But his attentiveness felt suffocating rather than caring. Jake was monitoring my every move, making sure I didn't have a moment alone to process my thoughts or examine our home without his guidance. As we lay in bed together, Jake pulled me close and began stroking my hair in what he probably thought was a soothing gesture. Maya, I want you to know that whatever you remember or don't remember, I'm committed to making this work, he said. Softly, we have a chance to build something even better than what we had before. Better how? I asked. Just more honest, more open. I think we both made mistakes before your accident got into bad patterns. But now we can start fresh. Focus on what really matters. Jake was essentially admitting that our previous marriage had been flawed while positioning himself as the one willing to overlook my supposed contributions to those flaws. It was masterful manipulation disguised as forgiveness. What kind of bad patterns? I pressed. Jake was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating how much truth he could reveal without exposing his affair. I think we both got too caught up in work, stopped prioritizing each other. You were climbing the corporate ladder. I was building my business, and somewhere along the way, we forgot to nurture our relationship. This was Jake's version of events, where our marital problems had been mutual and equally weighted rather than the result of his emotional withdrawal and secret relationship with Ashley. I'm sorry if I made you feel neglected, I said, playing the repentant wife. No, baby, we both made mistakes, Jake replied, though his tone suggested he believed my mistakes had been more significant than his. The important thing is that we're getting a second chance. A second chance. Jake kept using that phrase, as if my brain injury was some kind of gift that allowed him to erase his betrayal and start over with a clean slate. As Jake drifted off to sleep beside me, I lay awake thinking about the elaborate performance I'd witnessed since leaving the hospital. Jake had transformed our home into a shrine to a marriage that had never existed. Surrounded me with evidence of love and devotion that was entirely fabricated, and was treating my trauma as an opportunity to rewrite our relationship on his terms. The next morning brought new challenges as Jake implemented what he called my recovery routine. He'd apparently researched brain injury, rehabilitation, and had created a schedule designed to gradually reintroduce me to our life together while maintaining control over what information I accessed. I thought we could start with some gentle activities, Jake explained over breakfast. Maybe a walk through the neighborhood to see if anything looks familiar, then sometime looking through photo albums. The neighborhood walk was another exercise in creative storytelling. Jake pointed out houses where he claimed we'd attended parties, corners where we'd supposedly shared romantic moments, and local businesses where we'd allegedly been regular customers. Most of these stories were obvious fabrications, but some contained enough truth to be believable. That's where we had our first big fight, Jake said, pointing to a small park near our house. You thought I was taking you for granted, and I realized you were right. We sat on that bench and talked for hours about how to communicate better. This conversation had actually taken place in our living room, and it had been about Jake's habit of making plans without consulting me. But Jake was relocating the memory to a more romantic setting and reframing the conflict as a mutual communication issue rather than his specific lack of consideration. When we returned home, Jake's phone rang with what he claimed was a work call, but I caught enough of the conversation to know he was talking to a woman. His voice took on a tender quality that was completely different from how he spoke to actual clients, and he kept saying things like, I know, baby, and just a little longer. Sorry about that, Jake said when he hung up. Client having a crisis about staging her house for sale. But I'd heard enough to know that Jake was reassuring Ashley about something. He's probably explaining why he couldn't see her while he was playing nurse to his brain-damaged wife. That afternoon, Jake announced that we were going to have visitors. Tyler and Jessica want to stop by and see how you're settling in at home, he said. I thought it might be good for you to interact with familiar people in a comfortable setting. Tyler and Jessica arrived with flowers and what appeared to be carefully rehearsed casual conversation, but I noticed that Jessica seemed uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact and speaking in the kind of overly cheerful tone people use around sick children. Maya, you look so much better, Jessica said, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by my performance of memory loss. How does it feel to be home? Overwhelming but good, I replied. Everything feels familiar but different, if that makes sense. Tyler nodded sympathetically. That must be so strange. but you've got the best husband in the world taking care of you. There was something pointed about the way Tyler emphasized Jake's role as caregiver, as if he was trying to convince me of something rather than simply making conversation. As the visit progressed, I began to notice tension between Tyler and Jessica that suggested they disagreed about something before arriving. Jessica kept starting to say things and then catching herself, while Tyler seemed to be monitoring her conversation carefully. "Maya, do you remember that girls' night we had a few weeks before your accident?" Jessica asked suddenly. "And Sophia went to that new wine bar downtown?" I saw Jake and Tyler exchange a quick glance, and Tyler immediately jumped in. "Jess, the doctor said Maya's recent memories might be completely gone. God, it's better not to push too hard to make her remember specific events." But Jessica's question had clearly rattled Jake. "What did we talk about that night?" I asked innocently. Jessica looked around the room uncertainly before answering. "Just girl stuff. Work, relationships, life plans. Nothing important." The way she said nothing important suggested it had been very important indeed, and I made a mental note to contact both Jessica and Sophia once I had the opportunity to speak with them privately. After Tyler and Jessica left, Jake seemed agitated. He paced around our living room, checking his phone obsessively and running his hands through his hair in the gesture I'd learned to recognize as his stress response. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Fine. Just work stuff," Jake replied, but his distraction was obvious. "Maya, I've been thinking that maybe we should limit visitors for a while. Too much stimulation might interfere with your recovery." Jake was clearly worried about what other people might accidentally reveal, and he wanted to maintain control over my access to information. The suggestion that visitors might interfere with my recovery was just another way of isolating me from anyone who might contradict his carefully constructed narrative. That evening, Jake received another mysterious phone call that sent him onto the back patio for a hushed conversation. This time, I managed to position myself near the kitchen window, where I could hear fragments of what he was saying. "I know it's hard, but you have to be patient," Jake was saying. "She doesn't remember anything, which means we have time to figure this out properly. No, I can't just leave her right now. It would look suspicious. Of course, I still love you. This doesn't change anything between us. Just trust me, okay? I have a plan." When Jake returned from his call, his facade of domestic contentment seemed even more strained. I could see the effort it was taking for him to maintain his performance, and I realized that living this double life was becoming increasingly difficult for him. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "It's just a client with some questions about a listing," Jake replied, but he couldn't quite meet my eyes. As we prepared for bed that night, I reflected on everything I'd observed since coming home from the hospital. Jake had created an elaborate fantasy version of our marriage, complete with physical evidence and coached supporting characters. He was juggling his fake devotion to me with his real relationship with Ashley, all while planning some kind of long-term strategy that would allow him to escape our marriage without looking like the villain. But Jake had made one crucial miscalculation. He assumed that a woman with brain damage would be grateful for his care and attention, that I would accept whatever version of reality he chose to present. I had no idea that I was documenting every lie, every manipulation, every moment of his elaborate performance. And soon, very soon, I was going to show Jake Morrison what happened when you tried to gaslight Maya Chen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.